The first memory I have of Thanksgiving is the smell of my grandmother's kitchen. Butter and sage and something sweet baking in the oven. And the sound of football coming from the living room and feeling like the whole world was exactly the right size. That was before my parents divorced, before my father remarried, before I understood that some doors, once closed, don't open the same way twice. My name is Ivy. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my adult life, I told myself I had made peace with how things turned out. I told myself it was fine, that families break apart and rearrange themselves all the time, that I was lucky to have what I had, that I shouldn't want more. I got pretty good at believing that. Until the November I showed up at my father's house for Thanksgiving dinner with a pie I had baked myself and a card I had spent 40 minutes picking out at the drugstore. And my stepmother opened the door, looked me up and down, and said, "We actually don't have room for you this year. I'm sorry, but this is a family dinner." Then she closed the door. She didn't slam it. That's the part I keep coming back to. She closed it quietly, almost gently, the way you close a door when there's a sleeping baby in the house. Like I was a disturbance that had already been handled. I stood on that front porch for probably 30 seconds. Maybe longer. The pie was still warm in my hands. I could hear people laughing inside. My half-sister, I think, and someone I didn't recognize. And the television. It was 42 degrees, and I hadn't worn a heavy enough coat, because I had told myself it wasn't that far from the car to the door. I walked back to my car. I put the pie on the passenger seat, and then I sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel, and I thought, very clearly, this is actually happening. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without the before part. My parents split up when I was 9. It wasn't dramatic, or maybe it was, but I was kept away from most of it. What I knew was that my mom sat me down at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon and said that she and my dad were going to live in different houses from now on, and that it wasn't about me, and that they both loved me very much. I nodded and asked if I could still watch my show, because I was 9 and that was the only response I had available. My dad moved into an apartment about 20 minutes away. I spent weekends with him for a while, then every other weekend. Then it got complicated with schedules and his travel for work. And by the time I was in high school, I mostly just saw him on holidays and for occasional dinners that always felt slightly formal, like we were two people trying to remember who we used to be to each other. He met his wife. I'll call her my stepmother, though she has never once felt like anything maternal to me. When I was 16, her name is Darlene. She was 52 at the time and had 2 adult kids of her own from a previous marriage, a son named Owen and a daughter named Prue, both of whom seemed to regard me with the same polite indifference their mother did. My dad married her 14 months after they started dating. I was not a bridesmaid. I was not asked to do a reading. I sat in the third row and watched and smiled when someone pointed a camera at me. After the wedding, things got quieter. My dad called less. When I called him, Darlene sometimes answered and said he'd call me back. And sometimes he did and sometimes he didn't. I graduated high school. I went to college in Ohio. I got a degree in nursing and moved back to the area because my mom was here and this was home. And also because I am, at my core, someone who has a hard time letting go of things. I kept trying with my dad. That's the thing I need you to understand. I kept showing up. I texted him happy birthday every year without fail. I sent Christmas cards to the house, real cards, with stamps. For 3 years, I got nothing back. And I told myself maybe Darlene handled the mail, maybe the cards got lost, maybe he was busy. I called him on Father's Day. Half the time it went to voicemail. My mom knew how much I was struggling with it, even when I pretended I wasn't. She's the kind of person who doesn't push, but she also doesn't pretend not to see things. One evening when I was visiting her, she said, "You don't have to keep reaching for someone who won't reach back." And I said I knew that, and she gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, and she was right not to. The Thanksgiving I'm talking about, the one with the door, was 3 years ago. I was 28. My dad had actually called me in October, which was unusual enough that I remember exactly where I was when my phone rang. I was in the parking lot of the grocery store. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number at first. He'd gotten a new phone. He sounded good. He sounded warm, actually, in a way that I hadn't heard in years. He said he missed me. He said he and Darlene were hosting Thanksgiving this year, and he wanted me to come. He gave me the time, 4 o'clock, and said to bring whatever I wanted. It didn't matter. Just come. He said, "I want you there, Ivy. I mean it." I said yes before he finished the sentence. I spent 2 weeks looking forward to it in a way that embarrassed me. Honestly, I was 28 years old and I felt like a kid waiting for Christmas morning. I baked a pie from scratch, a brown sugar sweet potato pie, my grandmother's recipe, the one my dad used to say was his favorite. I bought a card, I planned my outfit. I drove 45 minutes to get there, and then Darlene opened the door and told me there was no room for me and closed it. I sat in my car for about 4 minutes. Then my phone buzzed. It was my dad. "Hey, are you on your way?" I stared at that text for a long time. He didn't know. She had done this without telling him. He didn't know. She had done this without telling him. I typed back, I was just at the door. Darlene said there wasn't room for me. I'm in the car. The three dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then what? Stay there. Don't leave. I didn't leave. I didn't leave. I almost did. Every 30 seconds, I thought about starting the engine and just going home and never talking about it again, which is my default, which is the thing my therapist and I have spent a considerable amount of time on. But I stayed. 11 minutes later, I know because I washed the caulk. My dad came out the front door in his socks. No jacket. He walked down the driveway to my car and knocked on the window, and I rolled it down, and he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, come inside, please." She said there wasn't room. There's room. His voice was tight. Come inside. I got out of the car. I brought the pie. I walked back up the driveway and into the house, and the living room went quiet when I came in. Owen and Prue were there, and Prue's husband and my half-sister. My dad and Darlene's daughter, who was 12 at the time and who I genuinely adored. None of this was about her. And two people I had never met. Everyone looked at me. Darlene was standing near the kitchen doorway and she met my eyes for exactly 1 second and then looked away. Dinner was strained in the particular way that family dinners get strained when something has happened that everyone knows about and no one is acknowledging. Conversations floated on the surface. People complimented the food. My dad kept the television on, which he normally didn't do at dinner. And I think it was because the noise helped. My half-sister sat next to me and showed me something on her tablet, and I focused on that, on being present for her because she was 12 and she didn't deserve to feel the weight of whatever was happening at that table. I left as soon as I reasonably could after dinner. My dad walked me to my car. It was colder now. Genuinely cold. And he had a jacket on this time. He said, "I want you to know that I didn't know she was going to do that." "I know," I said. "I want you to know that I want you here. I have always wanted you here." I looked at him. I said, "I know you want that to be true." And I got in my car and I drove home. I cried on the highway, which is not recommended, and I called my best friend Sheila on Bluetooth, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting. And then she said, "I'm going to need you to understand that this is not your fault, and also that woman is genuinely terrible." And somehow that helped. Here's what I did not know yet. That this was not the first time Darlene had done something like this. I found that out in January, when my aunt, my dad's older sister, who lives in Portland and who I had not spoken to in almost 4 years, reached out to me on social media. She said she'd been thinking about me and wanted to reconnect. She asked if I'd be willing to get on a video call. I said yes, half out of curiosity and half out of something that felt a lot like hope. We talked for almost 2 hours. My aunt is a direct person. She's always been direct. She said she wanted me to know some things that she felt I deserved to know. And she hoped I would hear them without it making things worse. I said I'd try. She told me that for years she'd been trying to stay in contact with me, that she'd sent gifts to my dad's address for my birthday every year until I was about 22, and that she'd never heard anything back. That she'd assumed I wasn't interested in maintaining the relationship, that it had hurt her. I told her I had never received any of those gifts. We were both quiet for a moment. She told me that 2 years before the Thanksgiving incident, she had called my dad directly and asked why I seemed so distant from the family, and that my dad had said something vague about me being difficult and not really making an effort. My aunt said she believed him, because why wouldn't she, but that something about it had always nagged at her. "She controls the house," my aunt said carefully. "She controls what comes in and what goes out. I don't know how much your father actually knows and how much he just doesn't ask because asking is uncomfortable." I thought about the cards I'd sent, the calls that went to voicemail, the years of silence that I'd filled in with explanations that were always, somehow, my fault. I asked my aunt if she had ever said anything directly to Darlene. Once, she said. She told me that your father had a new family now and that it was important for the children in the house to feel like it was a real family, not constantly disrupted by outside relationships. My aunt paused. She said outside relationships. You are his daughter. After I got off the call, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I wasn't angry yet. I was something more like that hollow feeling. After a fever breaks, tired and strange, and not quite sure what is real. I had spent years thinking I was the problem, years apologizing in my head for things I couldn't name, years trying harder and quietly assuming that the trying wasn't enough because something was wrong with me. Nothing was wrong with me. Someone had been very deliberately, very quietly, working to make sure I stayed on the outside. And the worst part wasn't even that she'd done it. The worst part was how easy it had been, how little it took. A few unanswered calls, a few redirected packages, one woman at her door saying, "There's no room," and a man inside who didn't come out fast enough. I want to be honest about my dad, because I think the easy version of this story is one where he's a villain, and that's not what he is. He's a man who wanted peace in his house and convinced himself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping his family. He told himself that I was okay, that I was independent, that I was fine on my own. He never asked the right questions because asking would have required him to look at something he didn't want to see. I understand that. I am also still angry about it, in a way that has changed shape over the years but has not gone away. That spring, my dad called me. Not Darlene. Not a text. He called, and when I answered, he said, "I need to talk to you. Can I come see you?" He drove to my apartment. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair my aunt had sat in on the video call, and he told me that he'd been doing some thinking. He said he'd talked to my aunt. He said he'd started asking questions that he should have asked a long time ago. He said he was sorry. Not in the way people say sorry when they want to end an uncomfortable conversation, but in the way that costs something, that comes out slow and sits heavy in the air. He said he had found in a drawer in his home office a stack of returned mail. Birthday cards from my aunt. A letter from me that I had sent when I was 23, after a particularly hard stretch, asking if we could talk. Packages, still in their original Amazon shipping, never opened. Darlene had intercepted them, he said. He didn't know for how long, he didn't know the full extent. He was still finding things. I asked him what he was going to do. He looked at his hands. He said, "I have a daughter in that house who is 12 years old." I said I understood. He said, "I'm not choosing her over you. I want you to hear that. I'm not." I said, "What are you choosing?" He said he didn't know yet. He said he was trying to figure that out. He said he needed time. I said okay. That was the most honest conversation we had had in 15 years, and it happened because a drawer had been opened and some things had fallen out, and a woman who had gotten very comfortable with her version of control had finally made a mistake visible enough that it couldn't be explained away. I won't tell you everything that happened after that because some of it belongs to my father and my half-sister, and it's not mine to tell. What I will tell you is that Darlene and my dad separated 8 months later. My half-sister spent weekdays with my dad and weekends with her mom. My dad moved into a smaller place, a townhouse about 15 minutes from where I lived, and we started having dinner together. Tuesday nights usually. Nothing special. Sometimes I cooked, sometimes I picked something up. Once we attempted homemade pasta, which was a disaster and also wonderful. He met Sheila. He came to my work's holiday party and stood by the buffet table and talked to my coworkers about college football. And it was so normal that on the drive home I cried a little, quietly, in a way I didn't examine too closely. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now, because it isn't. And because I don't think that would be honest. My dad and I are still learning each other. There are years missing. There are things that should have happened. Graduations, hard days, ordinary Tuesdays when he wasn't there and couldn't be retroactively inserted. I carry that. I think I always will. But last Thanksgiving, I sat at my father's table. My half-sister was there, and my aunt had flown in from Portland, and Sheila came because she had nowhere else to be, and my dad had said without hesitation, "Bring her." I made the sweet potato pie again. My dad said it tasted exactly like he remembered, and I said I knew, and he looked at me across the table with something on his face that I had been waiting a long time to see. My aunt squeezed my hand under the table at some point during dinner, for no reason, and I squeezed back. After dinner, my half-sister asked me to help her with a puzzle she'd brought. It was one of those impossible ones. 1,000 pieces, all pale blue sky. We sat on the floor in the living room while the adults talked, sorting through pieces that all looked the same, and she kept finding ones that fit and showing them to me like each one was something worth celebrating. And I thought, this is it. This is what it was supposed to feel like all along. Not perfect, not without damage, but real and warm and mine. I still have the card I bought that Thanksgiving 3 years ago. The one I brought to the door. I never gave it to him that night. I left with it still in my coat pocket. And somehow I never threw it out. It's in the back of a drawer in my apartment, a little bent at one corner. I've thought about giving it to him, now that things are different. I thought about it a lot. I think I'm going to. I think this next Thanksgiving, I'm going to take it out of the drawer, and I'm going to give it to him at the table. And I'm not going to explain why I kept it. I think he'll understand. Some things you hold on to because you're not ready to let them go. And some things you hold on to because you always knew, somewhere underneath everything, that the right moment was still coming. I've thought a lot about what made everything finally shift. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't me saying the right thing at the right moment. It was a drawer. An ordinary desk drawer in my father's home office, with a stack of returned mail inside it. Cards, packages, a letter I had written at 23 when I was barely holding it together and just needed my dad to know I was trying. All of it intercepted. All of it intercepted. All of it quietly buried. That's the thing about control that operates in the dark. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to go unquestioned long enough. Darlene never raised her voice at me. She never called me names. She closed the door gently and told me there was no room, and that was all it took, because she had been building the conditions for that moment for years. Every unanswered call, every birthday that passed without acknowledgement, every time I told myself I must have done something wrong, that I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't likable enough, wasn't worth the effort. She didn't have to say any of that. I said it to myself. I think about that a lot when I feel tempted to let silence mean something it doesn't. Silence isn't always indifference. Sometimes it's a door that got closed before you even knew to knock. What I know now, that I didn't know at 28 standing on that porch, is that the story I was telling myself about my own life wasn't entirely mine. Someone else had been editing it, and the only reason I eventually got to read the real version was because my aunt stayed curious, and my dad finally looked in a drawer, and I stayed in that parking lot instead of driving away. I used to think resilience was about not breaking. I don't think that anymore. I think resilience is about what you do after you've already broken a little. Whether you harden around the damage, or whether you let the right people in to help you figure out what actually happened. I let Sheila in. I let my aunt in. Eventually I let my dad in, which was the hardest one, because he was the person I most needed, and the person I was most afraid to need. And my half-sister. She had nothing to do with any of this, and she deserved someone who showed up for her anyway. That's what I kept coming back to on the drive home that first Thanksgiving. I could be angry at the situation and still choose to be present for her. Those two things could both be true at the same time. Growing up means learning to hold more than one true thing. The card is still in my drawer, a little bent at the corner, 3 years old. I'm going to give it to my dad this Thanksgiving. Not because everything is fixed, it isn't. But because some gestures matter more after they've waited. Because some things mean more for having survived the distance. What happened to me wasn't fair. What Darlene did had real consequences that I am still, in small ways, working through. And my dad's willingness to look away cost us both something we can't fully get back. Those are true things, and I don't soften them. But I'm also sitting at that table now. My aunt is flying in. Sheila is coming. My half-sister is going to show me another impossible puzzle. I'll take that. I'll take all of it.